Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual session, which I hope you are now all very accustomed to. I'm afraid me a little less so in delivering a presentation from my living room, so we shall see how we get on. I can assure you, though, that all dogs and small children have been removed from my building, so I shouldn't be interrupted, hopefully. My colleague John and I will be talking to you today about how housing associations can benefit from taking an agile approach to working. Agile working may seem like a little bit of a dark art. However, we are in expert hands today, so we aim for you to end this session with some really simple, practical ways in which you can implement agile working into your organisations. Next slide, please. And again. As mentioned, I have John Palfreyman with me today. John joined Novus Property Solutions just over 2 years ago to support us on our digital transformation journey after retiring as director of IBM. We are incredibly lucky and grateful to have John on board with us, and we have certainly learned a lot from him about what the art of the possible is utilising technology effectively. John has written and published 2 books, Business Blockchain, Unblocking Transformational Potential, and a digital transformation handbook, which you can find on Amazon. Hi, John.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks very much for the introduction. Let me introduce Sophie now. Sophie joined the group back in 2009 as a marketing coordinator. Obviously got on really well because in 2013 she was awarded the Young Marketeer of the Year by CMA. Things didn't stop there. In 2020 was a big year for Sophie as well. Back earlier in the year, she was appointed as a People and Culture Director to our main board, and also more recently by CITB as a trustee. The 3 words I'd use to describe Sophie are visionary, compassionate, and driven. And I'm going to hand things back over to Sophie later on, but I'm going to take the next few slides and kick things off. Next slide, please. So let's start this short section by introducing the concepts of Agile with a short definition and explanation. Next slide, please. When we want to understand Agile working, it's best to start with the term Agile, which has been around for some time. We all know that change is inevitable and much depends on how we adapt and evolve to this change. I've got a close friend who spent most of his career in the US Marines, and their mission or their motto is adapt and overcome. And that is at the center of the concept of Agile. The other way of looking at Agile is through its opposite. The opposite of Agile is clearly fixed. That's pretty obvious, but fixed means when things change, you bury your hand in the sand and you hope change will go away and we can just get up back to normal. This is usually quite dangerous in the limit, so not to be recommended. Next slide, please. This slide, while it's building, I usually term this 5 phases of Agile. But while it's building, I actually want to give a credit to Kieran, who actually built the slide animation. It's way beyond my PowerPoint skills, so well done, Kieran, for doing that. And I think he's also teasing me because he knows I've got a great aversion to slide animation. So I think beautiful slide animation. Thanks, Kieran. Also as well to Peter, Hannah and Ben from the team at Novus who've helped us prepare for this event. Thanks very much, guys. Here, I just really want to whet your appetite for these 5 concepts, which I'm going to come back to later on in the presentation and explain them in some more detail. But let's start with strategy. Strategy is really interesting in that organizations need a long-term vision and a long-term plan, but they need to be able to combine this with the ability to adapt to change. And that's at the essence of strategic agility. Also, when we talk about digital transformation, an incremental, continuous approach to digital transformation, leveraging technology and learning as we're going is really at the heart of agile transformation. Agile build is all around breaking down a big complex job into small parts, implementing those parts, learning as we go and reprioritizing so we can make the best of the right technology at the right time. Agile architectures all around what happens when you actually add new components to an existing system. Essentially, if you adopt the Agile approach to architecture, you make sure that your business processes and information base become more agile over time as you add new components rather than more fixed over time. So clearly a central component. And finally, the people aspect of agility. People within an organization must be agile enough to embrace change and not fight against it for the change to have the best effect. As I say, I'll explain all of these terms in more detail later, but I'll hand over to Sophie now, who will go through the challenges that housing associations face. Next slide, please.
Thanks, John. As John has highlighted there, to really understand how agile working can benefit the sector, we first must understand and appreciate some of the challenges that it's faced with. Next slide. Through working with our colleagues at Novus, some of our clients in the sector and their customers, we have identified 6 key themes at this time. Next slide. Boosting the reputation and changing the perceptions of housing associations has and remains a challenge. By listening to customers and really putting their needs first, as well as utilising advances in digital technology, we could see a shift in the perception of these customers. We have particularly seen a shift in customer expectations over the last few months. People do not differentiate between service offerings, so they are starting to question why they are receiving a different level of service when maintaining their home to, for example, receiving an Amazon package. Next slide. Making finite budgets go further and making use of investments by leveraging data and information. Using historical systems that don't share or talk to each other in a hidden silo manner is not allowing information to be utilised effectively. However, with an ever-increasing mission for housing associations to improve socio-economic conditions through the clarification of value and ensuring a return on investment really allows the sector to think differently. Reviewing delivery models, for example, such as moving away from a planned model and moving more towards the demand approach, requires better, more timely data to make effective business decisions. This not only assists with maintaining the stock, but has limitless potential in providing a great service to the customers. Next slide, please. Demonstrating compliance with an ever-evolving and challenging regulatory framework. The absolute necessity for customers to feel safe in their homes, as well as the emphasis on the importance of their health and safety, is the real driver for change here. We have seen a challenge for the sector in this area due to that siloed approach I spoke about earlier to information, as well as a compliance checking process that isn't utilised at the moment by technology. These are just some of the forces that are anchoring the sector. Next slide. Being a responsible provider by meeting UK government net zero 2050 targets is another challenge that we've identified. With a lack of clarity on milestones, as well as a new focus on recovering from COVID-19, will cause us all challenges in achieving this important yet very ambitious target. However, this goal will not disappear, and with increasing pressures from our younger generations particularly, the focus will be regained. Next slide. There are lots of examples within the housing sector of fantastic employers and really responding quickly to shifts in customer and employee expectations is very important. The expectations have never evolved at the current pace of change that we are seeing today. Having a wide demographic and each generation displaying a different set of needs really requires organisations across the whole of the globe really to move quickly. Next slide. And finally, recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, we must all be open to change to enable a quick recovery. Doing things differently is inevitable, and getting back on our feet whilst providing the services needed to your customers is paramount. COVID has exposed the inequalities in our society, as well as given us insight into how we can all work differently. These important learns and identifying opportunities have never been so important to shape our future. And in the words of Churchill, I love this quote, we should never let a good crisis go to waste. Next slide. So how do we now apply an agile approach to solving these challenges? John, I hope you're going to give us all the answers.
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks for taking us through those challenges. I think there are some really fascinating ones there. My goal for the next section is to actually go through 5 different case studies about how real life organizations have used Agile in anger to meet a set of really quite challenging objectives that they were facing. The concept here is to illustrate Agile in all its forms and start to look at how this could be applied to the sort of the challenges that housing associations face that Sophie's talked us through. So next slide, please. I'm going to start with the concept of strategic agility, but first of all, let me explain the format of these next few slides. Essentially, I've got a few points on the left-hand side outlining the main concepts of this form of agility. I've got a case study on the right-hand side, which I'm going to spend most of the time in talking through, giving you a bit of detail about the organisation and the challenges they faced and how they adapted. But you'll also notice that there's a little link at the bottom of each of the case studies. If you follow that link, you can actually get access to the raw case study information if you want to study it in more detail and really understand what they did. But let's start with the concept of strategic agility. This is sort of quite recent concept. It came about in around about 2008, where an executive from the Nokia Corporation went and spent some time in the Instead Business School and looked at the reasons for Nokia's roller coaster ride over the previous several years. And they came up with the heart of this being the paradox between 2 contradictory elements of strategy: the necessity to provide a long-term vision and continuity for staff, but also the ability to react as inevitable changes occurred in the marketplace. And they actually found, by analysing Nokia as a case study, that there are 3 vital components for this ability to be agile while having a constant direction. That is, the ability of the leadership team to be always sensing inside their organisation and outside their organisation, looking at when changes occur, being open and listening for those changes. Also, to working together as in a manner of leadership unity, so the whole leadership team works together to move the organisation in the chosen direction of strategic intent. But also, and putting into account the agility dimension, the concept of having a fluid set of resources that can actually be reoriented and reconfigured to meet the needs of the organisation as they change over time and the organisation reaches its goals. Now, if we look at the NASA case study on the right-hand side, in 1996, NASA they actually spent nearly 5% of the US federal budget. This was by far the largest budget consumer, which plummeted in 1969 after the moon landings. They were, at that time in 1966, a prime contractor and an exclusive contractor for space technology, which they usually got built from scratch by specialist contractors. And at that time, they had what could be described as an authoritarian relationship with their suppliers. But between 1993 and 2006, NASA had to collaborate with a number of other nations to build the International Space Station. Their superiority position eroded through use of different cultures, different technologies, and different operating models, from the various players in the marketplace. Their budgets became questioned. The politicians started asking, why are we spending so much on NASA? And they had to form a new mode of efficiency and through sharing. And through this, they had to learn how to work very efficiently with their partners, leveraging their partners' capability to innovate and move forward. So how is this agile? Well, essentially, NASA were faced with a situation where their mission was constant. They were still charged with space exploration, but they had radical budget constraints, and they had to deal with these budget constraints in the same time as seeing the emergence of many commercial competitors. So they had to change their approach from a dominant command and control type approach to one where they were sharing costs and sharing rewards with their partnership. And through adopting this approach, they thrived and survived over the previous years. So moving to a more collaborative, open innovation approach across a partner network and the competitor ecosystem allowed NASA to move from the previous position to one which is very relevant to sustainable for the future. So next slide, please. My second form of Agile is the form of Agile that comes with digital transformation. Now, digital transformation, if it's to be effective, needs to be incremental and flexible and must also follow an organizational strategy. Strategy must be in the driving seat. And for this reason, I don't particularly like the term digital transformation because it makes it sound like digital comes first. That can never be the case. Strategy must always come first. And to illustrate this, I'm actually going to use a case study of Ericsson Corporation, which was put together by a university in Finland called the Aalto University. And this shows how Ericsson took on board a changing vision and looking how they're going to learn from work they'd already done in Agile, experiment and then scale up. But above all this, being guided by the business and actually avoiding doing technology just for technology's sake. So Ericsson, I'm sure everyone's heard of them. They're essentially a communications hardware, software and services organization, 100,000 employees, headquarters Sweden, turnover about 24 billion US dollars. Interestingly, their research and development team is about 25% of their headcount, so about 25,000 people involved in research and development. Ericsson recently acquired a platform, a software platform, delivering multiplicity of different services. And they actually wanted to scale this platform up and come up with a method by which they could continuously develop and deliver new features and functions and rapidly scale up this platform over the different geographies of operation. To do this, they actually built on the lessons that they'd learned from using Agile development within Ericsson. They transformed in a constant and rapid method as in the same way that they'd done for their software development. And the case study documented the pragmatic lessons that Ericsson had learned as an organization wishing to embrace Agile transformation. They led with an experimental approach. They then adopted a stepwise and rapid continuous development of services and new facilities within their software platform. And they scaled this up quickly to include new offerings and also to scale it out across new organizational geographies and all the different parts of the Ericsson organization. So next slide, please. Let's move on to the next aspect of agility. So this is build agility. And in fact, this is where the Agile concept started. Back in round about 2001, a number of software engineers got together and came up with a set of Agile values and principles, because they were really worried about the traditional methods of software development, which were commonly called waterfall methods. And a lot of these projects went wrong and overran and had a difficulty meeting budget. One way of actually giving an analogy for Agile development is that of eating the elephant, when clearly, eating the elephant, the only way you can do that is in very small bites. So the analogy is to break a large job into very small parts, involve the user throughout in the prioritization of the delivery of those parts, constantly reprioritize the different order of delivery, again, in association with the user, and adopt a no surprises culture as we go through. Now, to illustrate this, I chose to use the Dubai Now application case study. This was developed under the goal of the Dubai government to make Dubai the happiest city on the planet. So they clearly had a vision. The vision with Dubai Now was actually driving all services, all government services through one integrated app with no paper, a very small number of call centers, and smashing bureaucracy, making friction-free access of government services to customers or citizens. This one app was built incrementally and rolled out over time. It was providing a coherent, connected digital experience for all citizens and visitors to Dubai. Was developed by a culturally diverse team to reflect the cultural diversity of the citizen base within Dubai and the desire of the government to appeal to a variety of different citizens, different nationalities. The app was launched back in 2015, and by mid-2019, 7.5 million transactions have actually been routed through the app, approximately totaling about $1 billion in value. As interestingly, they've managed to reduce their call centers, which were the previous way of actually taking access to government services, from in the order of hundreds to the order of to just a handful of call centers, with the mission to get people happy and comfortable using the Dubai Now app. So the methods they use, again, were quite industry leading. They combined design thinking with agile build methods, making sure that their development team really reflected the wants and needs of the citizens in Dubai. And I think these guys were exemplary in the concept of thinking big and then going from incremental development, learning as they go and growing as they go along. So again, a very interesting case study with some really compelling lessons for us. Next slide, please. The next aspect of agility is all around architectural agility. And this is really about making smart decisions and making sure that when new stuff to your organization, whether it's information-based or systems development, that you're always making your architecture more agile, not less agile as we go. So doing things like embracing open standards, looking at techniques like open innovation, avoiding specific vendor lock-in, all add to the net agility of the organization. And this case study that I want to talk you through is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States. A bit of a mouthful, so I'll call them NOAA from now on. And they actually had an overreaching strategy-first way of looking at the delivery of new services while making sure of they executed their mission. Now, again, they're probably in the UK, they're not a terribly well-known organization, but their mission in the US is to understand and predict changes in climate, weather, and oceans, and around the oceans and coasts of the US. And they actually own a selection of collection assets. In fact, they collect 10 terabytes a day of data from satellites, radars, ships, weather models, and other sources. Now, if, like me, you have difficulty envisioning things like 10 terabytes, I want to use a very simple analogy. Imagine if you had a penny, and I think we're still using pennies, but if you had a penny and you wrote on the penny the equivalent of 1 byte of information. So, you know, I'm sure everyone knows a byte can either be a letter or a number. So you write 1 byte on a penny. And you make a stack of pennies. You stack the pennies on top of each other, representing increasing amounts of data as you collect it. Well, if you were able to keep the pennies together in one stack, if you collected data at the same rate as NOAA, your stack of pennies would reach the sun within 10 days. So isn't that an amazing concept? That much data these guys are collecting. So 10 terabytes a day. So this data really constitutes weather forecasts, severe storm warnings, and those are the sort of products that NOAA traditionally would get from this data. They'd be forecasting climatic changes, and in fact, their forecasts affect more than 1/3 of the US gross domestic product in terms of the impact of delivery. So quite important stuff here. But no one wanted to explore new ways of executing their mission. And they decided to draw on this pool of raw data and employ third parties to analyze the data and provide value-added services. So realizing that those third parties would be quicker to respond and more able to analyze, to add these value-added services than they would, they decided to work with a partner ecosystem rather than delivering the products themselves. And in doing this, they leveraged an open cloud-based models, and again, incrementally went about doing this. This is an excellent example of agile architecture in operation. Their use of open cloud standards really is exemplary of this. They also looked at agile business model developments through the involvement of third parties who could rapidly change the weather product to the evolving client needs. And this allowed them in turn to leverage high value information and take this to the benefit of their end customers. Okay, let's move on to the final case study, please, on the next slide. This is all around people agility. Now, the relationship between organizational culture, employee behavior, leadership and change is really complex, but vital to understand if organizations are to change. Change really always involves us moving outside our comfort zone, and organizational culture can either anchor us, prevent us changing, or actually pull us and help us move towards a changing situation. One of the most powerful forces in this is the drip down or trickle down effective leadership. And again, there's a really interesting study here conducted by Harvard Business Review, where they looked at 250 pairs of managers and subordinates and looked at 51 sets of behavior, good or bad. And they actually found that there was a very high degree of correlation between good and bad behavior. So essentially, people copy their boss's behavior, whether that's good or if they embrace agile and change, people are likely to copy that. If it's bad, if they're reluctant to change, fixed, inflexible, again, employees are likely to copy that as well. But organizational culture can actually be used as to competitive advantage. And the case study of Spotify really shows this to good effect. I'm sure we've all heard of Spotify. Probably some of us subscribe to their streaming media platform services. But I wonder whether you know that they actually enjoy a 36% market share against competitive giants like Apple, Google, and Amazon. I think of that, that's quite amazing. They were launched in 2006. They went public in 2018 with a $26 billion market capitalization. And they're exemplary in their use of values and culture to maintain their competitive positioning in a really competitive environment that I listed earlier. They translated their employee perspectives into 5 core values: innovation, collaboration, sincerity, passion, and playfulness. And they also then turned these, they aligned their culture to these values and made sure that they had teams, put teams together in a temporary fashion with leaders involved to address new types of service offering. They also worked in a trusting and open way. The leaders were involved in these work groups to show the sort of behaviors by example that they expected from their team members. And they also they encouraged idiosyncrasy and quirkiness, and to make sure that that inclusivity and diversity attributes could be used to connect with their suppliers, the artists, but also with the customer base, and make sure that their offerings were always relevant to the customer needs. So through this, they actually exhibited clear leadership in a competitive market through focusing on suppliers, the artists, the customers, and the employers. But also the temporary involvement of the leaders in these work teams, as I said, demonstrated behavior and the sort of behavior that they wanted to see, and really made sure that they could constantly reinvent to really put together new offerings that needed it as the market evolved quickly. So next slide, please. So how can all these things be used to address the challenges that we talked through by Sophie earlier on in the presentation? Next slide, please. Clearly, different organizations have different challenges, and the challenges are listed in summary form down the left-hand side of this little table. Every organisation would order these challenges differently. We came up with several different orders of priority, but the main thing is different people face these challenges different extents. And really along the top, I've provided the 5 case study that I've been through, and I would suggest that any organisation looks at which of these case studies resonates the most with them, using the ticks on here as guidance. And really take inspiration from these case studies and look at which aspects of Agile in action are most suitable to their particular organisational needs at any moment in time. Next slide, please. So my takeaway points before I hand back to Sophie for the Q&A are really that 2020 has probably been the most challenging year that most of us experienced, and continues to be a challenge. And Agile is all around making sure that we sustain a successful position when inevitable challenges and changes occur. There are many opportunities to learn from far and wide, from different industries, different geographies, and allow us to take inspiration from how other people have actually addressed very challenging situations and bring them back home and see how we can address them in anger. What we've attempted to do through this presentation is to provide a toolbox of new ideas. I really suggest that you go follow the links to the case studies and look in more detail, take inspiration from these ideas, and see which can be used in your organisation to best effect. But finally, to the last point, risk management and governance are key. These 2 points are not cool, they're certainly not sexy, but they're never more important. And I think however creative, however innovative, and however agile, don't lose sight of the need for these important organisational principles. Thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to hand over now on the next slide to Sophie for questions. But thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, John, for that. It's very insightful. And as John has said, there is lots of detail within those case studies. So please do go follow the links and have a good rummage through and see how best you can apply those in your organisations.